Airlines' David Susi joins us now. Now, David, look, as a former pilot, what do you make of this? What do you make of what we know so far about what happened?
Well, in this case, it looks like there was some weather in the area of La Hui, which is where they were trying to land, and they aborted their takeoff and went back around. And when they did that, what Southwest reported as a newer first officer inadvertently pushed down on the control yoke. Maybe he was trying to get out, maybe he had moved or fell forward, whatever it was, but he had inadvertently just literally pushed that control yoke forward, and it creates an incredibly rapid rate of descent. Now, this happened when he was only a few hundred feet above the ground because they had aborted their takeoff. So it dropped very quickly, like 4,000 feet per minute. So it was recovered quickly as well, but it must have been just terrifying for the passengers on board to have that happen that dramatically and that quickly.
And I think that one part is what I want to hone in on for a second. I mean, you've been in cockpits like that. You've been in cockpits in general. I mean, I guess the sense that I'm trying to get is how quickly does a nudge turn into a drop of this magnitude? I think in my head, I would like to think it takes a little bit more than a quick touch and adjustment for it to pitch that rapidly, but that doesn't seem to be the case.
Yeah, I don't know how to put it into like a driver's terms, but
Yeah.
as you're driving down the highway and you have control of your car, and if you start moving that car to the left, and the faster you're going, the more dramatic that is when you do it. So you can just do it for a few seconds. If you do that for too long, it'll actually roll the car on the highway. And that's very similar to what happens here. You can push the control yoke down and you'll feel a bump. You'll feel it do that. But in this case, it had to have been pushed forward with quite some force for a little bit, for maybe a second or two, for a while, and to make that happen, to make that nose drop that dramatically and continue down. Now, in this particular model aircraft, the good news is that the pilot on the other side also is connected physically to that control yoke. So as that's pushed forward by one pilot, the other pilot can pull back and counteract that, which is what happened in this case. The Airbus is a little bit different. The Airbus has unique controls, so the one pilot doesn't know what the other pilot's doing, and we've had some issues with that in the past, but they're working on making sure that those are synchronized, those movements as well. But it doesn't take much to make a dramatic movement in the cockpit or in the cabin of the airplane.
Wow. And I want to center in on not this particular case, but another incident we learned about pretty recently, also involving a Southwest plane back in May. It experienced a Dutch roll, so a plane starts dangerously fishtailing. Can you just tell us a little bit more about what a Dutch roll is, why it can be so dangerous, and how unusual it probably felt for the people who were actually on that flight?
Yeah, the Dutch roll is described a little bit as if you look at the nose of the airplane, it makes a figure eight. So it's doing this kind of motion here. And what that starts with is a side slip of the aircraft. As the aircraft slips a little bit to one side or the other, which can be caused by a number of things, a control input, or perhaps just some weather in the area, it changes the lift on one wing versus the other. And whenever lift is changed, it changes drag. So that pulls the aircraft back in this direction if you're turning to one direction. And as that happens, it exposes the tail to more air on the back of it. So that pushes the airplane back the other way. So it starts doing this kind of fishtailing, as you described it, which is a good description of it. And it just starts doing this motion. Now, the aircraft takes care of that itself, typically. And if you just let it finish out its little motions and movements, it will take care of that itself. In this case, it went longer than normal because what happens is in the aircraft design, there has a yaw dampener that controls the rudder movement, how quickly the rudder goes back and forth. And what happens in that is that the yaw dampener has a power supply that senses what's happening and stops it immediately, typically. In this case, the power control unit for that yaw dampener was damaged and it wasn't working. So it was quite frightening for passengers to feel this, and it can actually cause damage to the airplane. It kind of has a whipping if it goes on too long, and it can cause structural damage to the airplane, which in this case, they're examining the aircraft to see if that happened. But that's what a Dutch roll is, and typically it won't happen. It's very, very rare to happen. And in this case, there's a reason for it, that there was a faulty component involved with trying to prevent it from happening.
Yeah, well, as people enter the very busy summer travel season, I just want to point out, this is not the majority of flights. This is very rare that this happens, but it is still important to note when these happen and try to analyze to make sure that there aren't any increasingly concerning patterns here. David Susi, really appreciate the time and perspective, as always.
Of course, Omar. Thank you.